Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast on the Her Hoop Stats Podcast Network. I'm Crina Mustafa alongside Calvin Wetzel, and we are into week 3 of the WNBA season. We're going to get into a ton of things today, some Las Vegas Aces signing stuff. We're going to go to the team stories and trends of the week. And then lastly, like we do every week, we'll give you games to watch and our team of the week. Cal, you ready?
So much to get into. I am so ready for all of it.
Yeah, speaking of so much to get into, our headline of the week was pretty easy this week, and that is none other than the Las Vegas Aces signing Tiff Hayes out of retirement. Felt so out of the blue. I just literally one morning I opened up Twitter and that was the first tweet on my timeline, and I was like, "What?" But basically, for those who didn't really follow this along, Tiff Hayes is on the Connecticut Sun. She was one of their guards, one of their main guards. And then she announced her retirement like 7, 8 months ago, it feels like. I don't even remember when she did anymore. The whole timeline feels like a blur, but she announced her retirement before the season. So the Sun didn't core her. So Las Vegas Aces sign her out of retirement. There's like so many questions, thoughts, everything circulating around this. But Cal, like, what was your first reaction when you saw this news? Was it like me where you're like, what?
Yeah, it was. And when they waived Deasia Fair, my first thought was like, oh, maybe they're going to sign someone. But for some reason, like this did not cross my mind of like who it would be, like that they're going to
Yeah.
go pull Tip out of retirement. But once I start thinking about it though, like it does make a lot of sense because this is like kind of what you see in a lot of sports. I feel like you see the veteran player who at this point in their career is just trying to go get a ring or go get another ring, and they know that they're not going to be like the star centerpiece on some team. They'd rather play on a good team where they have a lot of stars around them. Whereas in Tip's prime, like she was a really 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 important player on the Atlanta Dream, obviously, and in the Aces. On the Aces, she's going to be more of a complementary piece. So from her perspective, it makes sense, and from the Aces' perspective, it makes sense too because this team isn't very deep. We know that they're not even particularly deep, even when they're healthy. Right now, they're not healthy. Obviously, after Candace retired, and then Chelsea Gray has been hurt still. So, like, you have Kate Martin as your sixth player of the year right now, which is awesome for Kate Martin. I love her game. I think it's been a really cool story, but it's not
She's been
exactly.
having a season.
She has been, and it's been huge for the Aces. They've needed it, and
Mhm.
I like so much respect for Kate Martin. That's not at any level what I'm trying to say, but it's not exactly how you probably drew it up if you were the Aces, having Kate Martin be your top player off the bench. So now you bring in Tip Hayes, and she can score in a lot of different ways. She's a great shooter. I think is really gonna fit in at a high level in terms of how she can score and sort of play off those stars. I think she's an underrated passer, which it is not something that she's going to come in and like replace Chelsea Gray level production. Like Jackie Young has been basically doing that, and
Yeah.
and Jackie Young is another amazing story in how she's been able to step up in that distributor role, and that's still all her. But I do think that that's something that Tip maybe hasn't gotten enough credit for throughout her career, and something that she'll be able to bring to this team, especially on a team where, like I said, you have stars. It's really important. The ball movement is something that they hang their hat on. And if nothing else, like aside from all of that, it's not to be too like reductive and cliche, but it just gives you another body. Like this just gives you another basketball player who you can put on the
Yeah.
court now, which is a big deal for a team that doesn't have enough of them. So this is one of those things where just when we start talking about the Aces, oh, like maybe they're a little more vulnerable. They lost their second game, like oh the Sun, or now they go add Tip Hayes, and they're like, no, we're still the best team in the league. Just another scary thing for everyone to contend with, and I'm really excited to see how it fits and how it all works out when she gets going.
Yeah, and it's important to note too that Tip had retired from the WNBA. Like she was still playing overseas. So it's not like you're picking up a player who hasn't been playing basketball. Like she's still very much ready to go. And I think that's so important. There's also like a little bit of questions. I'm like, does she now get the $100,000 from the city with that sponsorship? Like, is that like, and because I think our own Richard Cohen reported that the Aces signed her with like $88,000, which was like the most that they could without getting rid of another player and just like hitting the cap. But um Yeah, it's like a very good question to ask. Does this affect the current investigation that's already happening with the Las Vegas Aces with this whole sponsorship thing? Does Deasia still get her $100,000? Like it's all very like, oh, like this is very, very interesting. But yeah, no, I think everything you said is super valid, especially on the basketball side of things. Definitely threw me for like I was like you, I was like, yes, they're gonna sign somebody, but I was thinking more of like maybe like free agents who hadn't gotten signed to a team or players who happened to be on the market because they had gotten waived. And so like your
Someone who
mind
hadn't
doesn't
retired,
so yeah, like your
basically.
mind doesn't go to somebody who announced their retirement like before
Yeah,
the season. So yeah, I
exactly.
think definitely like it definitely also like felt very like deja vu, like when they signed Candace Parker for the first time, and it kind of sent like shockwaves throughout the whole like community. Like it felt like that same feeling. Obviously Tiff Hayes is not Candace Parker, but it was a very similar just like feeling of shock. But yeah, everything you said was right. The Aces, yeah, like you said, they're never going to rush Chelsea back anyway. I'm really curious, though. We don't want to rush Chelsea back, but I'm still really curious on what her timeline is coming back to the court because, like you said, the Aces have dropped a couple. They are not the undefeated team that they were last year, but I think this might end up being good for them overall because you want to have games where you lose. Like as much as an undefeated team is like really like it was really historic what they did last year until, obviously they didn't finish the season undefeated, but they were undefeated for so long. I think though those are very special occasions, special moments when you get a team like that where it's kind of very hard to sustain, especially when you get hit with things like injuries, especially to your star point guard. So, all things considered, Asia Wilson is having another fantastic season already, 3 weeks in, which I feel has been like pretty quiet. But yeah, no, it's just another addition for Las Vegas Aces, which makes this like contender like race super super exciting. Especially as we get into some of these other teams that we're about to talk about. But do you have any kind of last thoughts on the Tip Hayes signing for the Aces?
Well, just on the Aces in general, like you said, like they're not going to rush Chelsea Gray back, and I think this is something you see too in a lot of sports where like teams that first start to build a contender but haven't climbed that hill completely to win that championship yet are gonna go all out and just leave it all on the table and do everything they can to get there. And I think of like the Connecticut Sun, how AT AT is also like the most in shape human being in the world, but like she'll be out there in the fourth quarter and
With
blowouts
two
sometimes.
torn
Like
labrums.
yeah, exactly. Like this is a team that has been really good for a really long time, and the only thing that they haven't done is win a championship. So they're
Yeah.
going to put it all out there. Once you climb that mountain, and the Aces have now in back-to-back years, you realize that you have nothing left to prove other than like, can we be the first three-peat since the Houston Comets, or can we continue this dynasty? There's nothing in the regular season, seeding-wise, record-wise, that you need to prove to anybody. So there's no reason for you to risk anything. So I like absolutely Chelsea Gray is not going to come back if she's 99%, I feel like. But that this just gives them, we've talked about their margin for error slimming in the regular season without Chelsea for a while. This opens that up a little bit. This gives you a little bit more of a margin for error signing Tip Hayes, which I think is going to be really helpful for them.
Absolutely. And you touched on a team that we're about to talk to about to not talk to. Wow. Words are hard today. It's been a long day, guys. But we are about to talk all things Connecticut Sun and more coming up right now. All right, Cal. The Sun may be undefeated, but I am not because I'm taking a lot of L's today already.
And that was a W, though. You recovered very well with that.
Thank you, thank you. But they are now 8-0 to start the season. They're only the seventh team in WNBA history to do so. And a fun stat from ESPN was that all previous 7 teams that went 8-0 to start the season made it to the WNBA finals, which I think is an interesting caveat there. When looking at this group, looking at Duana, Alyssa, Dejanay, Ty Harris, those have been kind of like your 4 strongest performers, I feel like, for the Sun this season so far. What has made them gel so far, and what are you hoping to kind of to continue to see out of this group?
I think the backcourt has been huge, and Dejanay Carrington, Ty Harris really speaks to like the benefit of having younger players sort of develop, and especially I think like we've talked before about how guards kind of it's even harder to transition to a higher level of basketball, and having them be able to learn from some veterans for a little bit in their career before they step into that bigger role. And I think that's what you're seeing with these two, especially Dejanay. 20th overall pick in 2021. A lot of second rounders in this league don't even make it. And I was looking back at that draft class. Everyone knows that that wasn't the best draft class in WNBA history. You can make an argument that she's the best player now from that class. So you could not necessarily, maybe you could at least make an argument, but I think this is like a really great case for me for expanded rosters. We have obviously expansion coming with extra teams, but I think just having one or two extra roster spots to be able to have more stories like this, players who their first 2, 3, 4 years in the league are playing behind someone, maybe fringe rotation, maybe a significant part of the rotation, but then they after someone moves on, they get their shot to step in the starting lineup and see how they can shine. So that development piece, I think that's just something that they make me think of. But on this backcourt, I haven't gotten a chance to go watch this yet as of recording. I'm sure I will, in the next 24 hours. But Mark Schindler put out a great video on Ty Harris that you should all go check out in her late clock scoring, which has been phenomenal this year. I think that's been a huge piece for the Sun as well. And then defensively, like this team has been a monster defensively, just lockdown city. It's so hard to create advantages against them because they have the personnel where if they have to switch, they can switch. They have these long athletic players who can stay in front of you. They're great at navigating screens. They do so much well on the defensive end. And every time I watch a Sun game, I feel like I look up and it's like the second quarter and the other team has like 8 points. It's unreal what this team is doing on the defensive end so far this season. Credit to Steph White, obviously, for really developing this defense. And obviously, that's what you get when you have veterans in the front court, too, who've played together for a while. The backcourt sort of newer, front court obviously has a lot of chemistry on and off the court. But I think that's really helpful, especially because the front court is just the biggest part of a basketball defense. So that's what I'm seeing from the Sun team, and I think sky's the limit for them this year.
Yeah, you talk that's kind of funny that the sky's the limit because the sun is in the sky. But
Didn't even do
anyway.
that on purpose, actually. That worked out great though.
Yeah, no, you talk about their defense. I just think I think they played against Atlanta this week and I think they held them to like 50 points or whatever it was. It was like Atlanta's like lowest score since like I forget when that where I was reading it. But yeah, that defense is really real. I think were they called the trees? I don't remember which team gets called the trees, but it does certainly feel like that with their size and their versatility. Speaking of the dream, they've had a pretty interesting week, in my opinion, because they did get a huge win over the Aces. And like we just mentioned, they had a little bit of a blowout loss against the Connecticut Sun. Cal, what did you kind of see in both the Aces and the Sun games, the good and the bad from this dream team? Wow, I didn't even mean to say dream team on purpose, but what did you see from Atlanta that you liked? And then also things that they probably need to work on.
It was such an Atlanta Dream week, I feel like, because of this seems like who they've been is a really high ceiling team that sometimes just has these letdown spots in the last year and a half. And in that Aces game, I mean, they shot the ball really well. They really boxed out and rebounded well on the defensive end. They did a lot of things well that when they are doing, I think that's the best version of this Atlanta team. And you see that they can compete with anybody. And then obviously the Sun game, part of that is just they ran into a buzzsaw in defense. And what are you going to do? But a lot of it, I think you wrote in your notes, and maybe you were going to ask me this, but I'm just jumping the gun and assuming you already asked me about Jordan Canada coming back and how she's going to affect this team. I think it's going to be a big deal. It's going to help the spacing a lot, which is probably something I wouldn't have said about Jordan Canada a year or 13 months ago, that she's going to help with spacing. But last year we saw how she kind of broke out, especially in terms of 3-point shooting with the Sparks. I think that's a big deal. If we put this clip up here from Atlanta. So this is also going back to, by the way, what I was talking about with the Sun defense. You see right here, AT and DB switch, that initial action, which they can obviously do really well. But Ryan still gets the ball here on the wing off this handoff. But now you see, I paused this so I could talk about it because I know we can't pause on StreamYard. Bree Jones is able to drop off of Tina Charles a little bit, and then they're also able to sag off of Haley at the top of the key because neither of those players have been like prolific 3-point threats this year. And so Ryan still makes that bucket because Ryan is just a tough bucket maker. That's what she does. But you saw that she had to kind of distort herself, hit that like one-legged step back and over contested traffic. Like the Sun forced her into a tough shot, and that was because they were able to load up on her a little bit more and not worry as much about some of those threats on her side of the floor that she could have passed to. And I think Jordan Canada is going to help a lot with that, spacing wise, but also just like having another ball handler in there who can create and who can break down the defenses, because that's where it all starts, is when you're able to break down and get into the paint. So I think she is gonna, a lot of those questions are gonna be answered when she comes back. Obviously, they already have a high ceiling and are playing really well when Ryan's on her game and hitting shots like that. Which in that game, it was the Connecticut Sun, so a lot of those shots didn't go in. But in some of those games, like the Aces game, a lot of those shots are going in, and you see what they can do. So the Dream Team is going to be one that's really interesting to follow. I think, especially when they get Jordan Canada back, to see kind of how the heights that they can reach at that point.
Yeah, and then kind of the last thing, I want to know your thoughts on kind of the Haley PG experiment. I know like something that's kind of been a little bit of a hot topic, especially with the Atlanta Dream, is just like playing time, especially to these younger players. We talked a little bit about Haley and Leticia at the beginning of the season before the season started in our season previews. So I'm very curious, like, how do you think this is kind of going for them, again, with the absence of Jordan Canada?
Yeah, I think it's another one of those things where when you're a guard, and especially when you're not like even Caitlin Clark, but especially when you're not maybe the number one pick overall type of player, that it takes you a little while to settle into the next level. And I think Haley Jones is going to be fine, but at this point and for this season, I do think that experiment is going to be over once Jordan Canada comes back. Jordan Canada is going to be the starting point guard on this team, and she's obviously much more experienced, a veteran. She can shoot at this point better than Haley can, and we've talked about on this podcast too. Like, shooting is something that develops. I still have not written off Haley Jones as a potential 3-point shooter at some point in her career. But again, right now she's not. And you saw in that clip how they played her because the Sun weren't particularly worried about her hitting that shot. So right now, yeah, if you play this back, Haley's the point guard right now. So she has it at the top of the key or on the wing there. And right now, the experiment, it's kind of treading water. I feel like we've seen flashes of Haley being really good and especially what she can do in transition. But she's at the top of the key right here. And like they have their back turned to her. That's sort of the flip side of it. And something that I think will be different when Jordan Canada comes back. So it's definitely a mixed bag in terms of how the experiment is going. It's not all bad. It's not all good. But it is something. Haley, when she is able to come in more in spurts, I think behind Jordan Canada and get a feel for the game, I think that'll help her a lot too, and be able to develop. And who knows, like maybe what we've seen with the Sun, where some of those players in year 4 or 5 now are really breaking out in the backcourt. Maybe we could see that with Haley Jones.
For sure. And then kind of our last team that we want to hit on for our trends and teams that we've liked so far this season, Minnesota Lynx. We've talked about them a little bit on the podcast so far. A lot of stuff has kind of happened as well. Dorka rejoins the team over the last week. K-Mac has just been on fire. I don't know what's happened. She has just unlocked a different level of fire, a different level of shooting, a different level of whatever you want to call it. She has been phenomenal for Minnesota over the last couple of weeks. Fee continues to play at an MVP level. Their rookie, well, again, I think it's funny because the W loves to do the 30-year-old rookie things. So I say rookie, but it's more of like, rookie-ish. Ipupa, she showed up big time against the Dallas Wings this week, where the Minnesota Lynx and Dallas Wings played. It was very, very close until that final quarter. Minnesota just pulled away like they always do. They turn it on and they finish it in crunch time. Where do you place this team as a contender right now? And if you don't want to place them as a contender, at least for the Commissioner's Cup final, because these are Commissioner Cup games, which I will get into when we get into our games to watch. But yeah, contender thoughts on the Minnesota Lynx.
Well, first off, who was it who used the phrase veteran rookie? Because I loved that. I feel like it was last year. Someone threw that
That's
out
a
there,
good
and
one.
that's what we're seeing, to go back to that. But in terms of contender tier, to me right now, there are 5 true championship contenders, and the Lynx are one of them. I wouldn't put them at the top of that 5, but they are definitely in that conversation with Las Vegas, New York, Connecticut, and Seattle. I think those are the 5 that I would really put in the category of, like, I would not be shocked to see them win a championship this year. In addition to all of the stuff you said, K-Mac has been knocking down everything. Atlanta Smith has been hitting shots. MVP, who we've talked about a lot, on this pod, and I know I've talked on other pods. Like, this was obvious that she would get to this level at some point. She's been building towards it, and now she's here. She is at an MVP level, and she's like just entering her prime, and it's so cool to see what she's doing. In addition to all of that, this is another team like the Sun that I continue to be so impressed with their defense. No one has topped 50% effective field goal percentage against them this year, which is the only team that can say that. Going back to Atlanta Smith, I think she's been a big X factor and a huge signing for this team because, like we said, she's hitting shots. She can space the floor and knock down the shots on pick and pops and stretch the floor as a 5, but also be able to bring that rim protection in that interior defense that the Lynx have really benefited from this year. So I think that's a big part of why the Lynx, they lead the league in 3-point percentage on offense, because they are able to have their rim protector also step out and hit threes, and then K-Mac is knocking down everything. So many different players on this team are knocking down shots, but I think that's been a really key signing for them, Atlanta Smith, and it's just kind of slotted in well with all the other players. And then if you ask Danny Barlavi, they'll tell you that Nafisa Collier playing with K-Mac on Fenner overseas over the offseason was a big deal for developing chemistry, which there's probably something to that. I think some of that stuff can really come from some of those other leagues. So there's a lot going for them right now. I would not have put them in the championship contender tier before the season, but I would have been wrong, and that's where I have them right now.
Yeah, and even just like shout out to Alyssa Peely as well too for starting to come into her own. We speak to development, and we're seeing it too. I think she had her 20-point game last week. So yeah, just been really cool to see how together this team is and how impressive they've been so far. It's really fun that I love that you said that you have 5 contenders, because I absolutely love the parity right now. Like, it just makes everything so much more fun because you really don't know what's going to happen. Like, anything, it feels like anything could happen right now, with the way that different teams match up, with where they are in the season, like how much they've developed with the players that they have so far. There's some teams that have like that history. They have some teams that are just like finally coming into their own. So it's really exciting. I really love that you said 5 contenders, because that makes me really happy and excited for the playoffs, which I know we're only in week 3 of the league, but of the season, but we're getting there. We'll get there before we know it.
I
But any
think
final
this
yeah,
year
go ahead.
is gonna have, sorry to cut you off. Back to the 5 contenders thing. The 4 versus 5 matchup this year, whoever it is going to be electric. It's going to be, in my opinion, the best by far first round matchup that we will have had in this new format, which is, only a few years old. But
Yeah.
whoever ends up in that spot, it's going to be one of those where we are all begging for it to be 5 games or 7 games instead of 3. So I can't
Yeah.
wait.
Absolutely. Oh my god. Not us getting excited for the playoffs 3 weeks into the season, but it's okay. That means basketball has been really, really good, and that's all that matters. But let's get into our games to watch for the week. Like I mentioned earlier, it is Commissioner's Cup week. And originally, you would have been like, Commissioner's Cup week? What does that mean? Because originally we just had like 10 games labeled as Commissioner's Cup games. And it was just like whatever team in each conference had the best record by the end of those games, they would face off in the final, all of that stuff. But the W has a new format of it this year. And I want to shout out a second shout out today for Mr. Mark Schindler. on our podcast, he put out a very detailed piece on WNBA.com just to kind of explain what is different about. That's funny. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll know why I'm laughing. If you don't know why and you're not on YouTube, go to YouTube. There's my weekly YouTube plug. But anyway, he put out a piece for the league just to explain what's different about the Commissioner's Cup this year. So I'll just say that really quick. So what's different? Teams will now play 5 Commissioner's Cup games instead of 10 qualifying games. However, all the games will be played from June 1st to 13th, so that's currently the week that we're in right now, condensing the period to highlight the in-season competition. Each team will play once against their in-conference opponents during the Cup qualifying games, and then the final will be played on June 25th between the top teams in Cup play by record from each conference. The team with the best overall record in Cup play will host the final, of course. Cal, what are your thoughts on this format? Especially because, I feel like this wasn't really broadcasted enough, or at least spoken about enough until we actually got to the week where I was like, oh. I was planning out my schedule for the month of June, and I was like, there's a weird gap of no games in the last week of June. And I was like, what am I missing? And I was like, oh, it's Commissioner's Cup final week. That's what it is. But what are your thoughts on this new format? And yeah.
Well, you're definitely right that they didn't really kind of broadcast or advertise it enough, because I also didn't realize that this format was new until a week ago, because for me, I was looking at the betting odds and they had the Liberty favored out of the East, and I was like, oh, but the Sun are undefeated and the Liberty have one Eastern Conference loss already. So I was like, I wonder why is that? Because in past years, these games already would have been counting towards it, even starting in May, which is what I thought was the case. But then our friend Miles Ehrlich corrected me. It's no, that everyone's 0-0. No one has played a Commissioner Cup game yet, as of a couple days ago. And so I kind of like it and kind of don't. It shortens, obviously, the schedule, like you said, June 1st to 13th. I think you said, right?
Yeah.
So it's this 2-week period. It's all just right now, and it simplifies it too. It's a lot easier because a lot of people were always like, Commissioner's Cup, how does it work? I don't understand. Rightfully so, is obviously sort of a complicated new concept, especially in
Yeah, and
US sport.
we had players being like, "Oh, I didn't even realize it was a Commissioner's Cup game." We had
Exactly.
that whole stuff happening within the first 2 or 3 years of this thing.
Yeah, so now they're like, all right, we're just gonna make it 5 games, one against each team, nice and simple, easy to explain, easy to understand. Everyone knows what's going on. Very short period. That's all good. Simplifies it. I understand that. On the flip side, only playing every team once means that some teams have an advantage over other teams. For example, the Aces only play the Storm at home and only play the Lynx at home, who, in my opinion, would be the 2 Western Conference teams that would be their biggest challengers. And both of them they get at home. Whereas the Storm have to go on the road to the Aces and on the road to the Lynx. So I would love to see, at least, if you want to advertise it more and figure out some other ways to kind of simplify it and make people care more and broadcast it more and all of that. I'm all about that. But I would love to see 10 games still, the home and home. So you get 2 against each team, 1 at home and 1 on the road, just to kind of equal it all out. And also it's fun. You could still do that. I mean, right now it takes 2 weeks. You could make it take 4 weeks or 5 weeks, basically a month. You could say the month of June, that's Commissioner's Cup month. Still wouldn't be that complicated, in my opinion. But now you have a game on at home and on the road against each team. So I don't know. I don't really feel that strongly about it. I'm not losing sleep over the fact that it's only 5 games instead of 10 or whatever. But if I were the king of the world, that's what I would do. Either way, it's going to be fun. And I do like the fact that we have the Commissioner's Cup that we've had for a few years now. I do think it's cool just to kind of add that extra game in the middle of the season that means something different. And it's always been a good game. So I'm excited for it no matter how they set it up.
Yeah, that's funny. If I was king of the world, that's what you would do, Cal.
I would do a lot of other things before I did that, but just strictly from a Commissioner's Cup sense.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, got you, got you. So anyway, let's tee up some of these games to watch this week that will count towards the Commissioner's Cup standings. On Tuesday, June 4, which is when you're listening to this, hopefully, we have 3 matchups that are all going to be on League Pass. We start with Mystics versus the Sun at 7 p.m. Eastern, followed up by Liberty in the Sky at 8 p.m. Eastern. I'm pretty excited for that one, considering how Liberty Sky has gone this season already. And then that will be followed up by Mercury versus Storm at 10 p.m. Eastern. Then on Wednesday, we've got 2 more matchups on League Pass. We got a lot of League Pass matchups this week. That must be the Commissioner's Cup situation. But we start with Aces Wings at 8 p.m. Eastern. Then is ended by Lynx Sparks at 10 p.m. Eastern, and that's on Wednesday, June 5th. On Thursday, we've got 2 more matchups. The first one is on Prime Video because that is Prime Video Day. Sky versus Mystics at 7 p.m. Eastern, followed up by Liberty versus Dream at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and that matchup will be on League Pass. And then, of course, we've got our Fridays are for the Ion, our WNBA on Ion, and that will be Fever Mystics at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Then we got 3 games at 10 p.m. Eastern. 3 late
Fridays
ones.
are for that too. Fridays are for Ion, and Fridays are for 3 games starting at the exact same time, and League Pass only letting you watch 2 at once.
Maybe it's like a thing to like keep people awake. They're like, if you just keep switching between each game, you'll stay alert and awake. So maybe that's like the strategy here. But
I see what they're going for.
yeah,
I
maybe.
Yeah, I still don't like it. Let's
But we
stagger them.
have
I wanna watch them all. Or just let us watch 3 screens. Why can't
it's
we get a 3rd
because
screen on League Pass?
It's because of all the West Coast teams. So we've got Storm versus Aces, then not followed at the same time will be Wings versus Sparks and Lynx versus Mercury, all at 10 p.m. Eastern on Ion or League Pass if you don't get Ion. But yeah, that's the weekly schedule. Hopefully you wrote it down. If you didn't catch that, you can reverse and write it down. That's my weekly homework to you, our loyal fans and listeners and followers of the pod. But we have finally gotten to the point in the show where we go over our team of the week. So the team that we really enjoyed watching over the course of the last week and who we think you should be watching heading into this next week of games. And that is none other than the Seattle Storm this week. We had no drum roll this week, but that's okay. They've won 4 games
I
in a
dropped the
row.
ball. My bad.
And it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Cal. But they won. I was gonna say they dropped 4 games. No, because you said drop the ball. But they won 4 games in a row. They're on the up. You know, after we talked about them kind of starting out the season a little bit shakier, taking more time to gel together, it seems like they're starting to find a little bit of momentum here. But what have you thought about their kind of past week? And we're going to ask, do they have another move on the way? Because they waived Dulcie Fanka-Mangiadu, and then we found out they actually just signed Joyner Holmes to a rest of season contract. In your notes, you had a couple of ideas. You wrote Tiana Hawkins, maybe like similar to the Aces, waiving like Deja Fair and bringing in Tip. And then you wrote, which I saw today and I laughed really hard. You wrote, never mind, because the Joyner news dropped.
Did you put LOL? Is that you?
Yeah, I put
Or was
LOL
that me?
because
I couldn't
no, that was
remember.
me.
I was like, did I put ha 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 and LOL? That was weird of me, but no, that was you.
I put LOL because it made me laugh out loud. But take me through your kind of like roller coaster thought process, you know, while this all was happening.
This was another one, especially after what the Aces did. I was like, well, they got to be signing someone if they're cutting someone. And of course, it was Joyner
And
Holmes
see,
who they had.
that made you get creative because you were like Tiana Hawkins, a player who we have no idea if she's retired or not, so she could be someone that they're signing.
Yeah, now that we saw Tip, I'm like, who knows? It could be anyone. I'm thinking of all sorts of different options, and of course, they go with the player who was on the team, got cut a month ago. I think she got cut literally like while we were recording on this podcast that one day, and we got the email, if I remember correctly. And now they brought her back. So shout out to Joyner. Good for her. I think this team is already showing signs of like building and developing that chemistry that new teams who go out and sign a bunch of free agents and a bunch of stars have to do and have to go through that period early in the season, which they did. They dropped a couple games against Minnesota to start the year. that may have ended up being more about Minnesota than it was about them. At the time, it seemed more about Seattle. But they're already putting the pieces together now because they have so many veterans who have been here before and know how to do this. And it's been really cool to see. I have this one clip that just stood out to me because this really shows, I think, the chemistry that they've already been developing on this baseline out of bounds with Skylar inbounding it. And then look at this oop. Like that's just a read. That's just feel. That's just playing together for a few weeks now instead of for 2 days or whatever, and knowing where each other's going to be, knowing Neck is going to slip there. So I really loved that play. I think we've been seeing a lot more of that type of stuff from them in the last few games than we did in that first week or so on offense, especially from them. Their top 3 true shooting percentages has come in their last 3 games. So obviously their offense is starting to figure it out a lot. And we're going to get a 3-day period. I mentioned their schedule coming up in the Commissioner's Cup. We're going to get a 3-day period where we are really going to find out if this team is fully here, championship contender status or not, and if they have any shot at winning the Commissioner's Cup or winning the West, because they got to go on the road to Las Vegas and to Minnesota twice in 3 days. And that's going to be huge for them in terms of, again, Commissioner's Cup, and also kind of testing out how far they've come, because some of those games that recently where their offense was looking a lot better were against the Mystics, shorthanded without Brittany Sykes, obviously with and then against the Fever, who are towards the bottom of the standings as well. But now we're gonna see where the Storm are at. We're gonna get a good litmus test, a good measuring stick this week, so or in the next couple weeks. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, so let's take a look at this final schedule before we wrap things up. If you want to catch the Seattle Storm this week, they play Tuesday, June 4th against the Phoenix Mercury at 10 p.m. Eastern on League Pass. Then they'll have that Friday slot at 10 p.m. Eastern against the Las Vegas Aces, and that will be on Ion and or League Pass. Cal, these are 2 big tests. What are you looking for in these games for the Seattle Storm?
I'm just looking for them to look as smooth and connected as they have against those teams that are lower in the standings. I'm looking for them to continue to make plays like you just saw, like, little lob alley oops off of a baseline out of bounds. And I'm looking for them to keep hitting shots. And ultimately, like, I'm looking to see, well, I'm also looking to see if they are going to use Joyner Holmes at all in the rotation, because there's a reason they signed her. I don't know
Yeah.
if she's going to be a big part of this team, but this is another team that isn't super deep. So I'm curious if they signed her to actually contribute rotationally at all, or just to kind of have stashed if needed, if someone gets hurt or something like that.
Yeah.
We'll see. But yeah, I'm looking for all of that.
Yeah, I think as somebody who watched her play in that Edmonton game, she looked pretty solid for them, and I think she's going to be somebody that they can rely on moving forward if they need to. So yeah, and even just knowing her story too in general, like she has been that player that has kind of bounced around from team to team on these like 10-day contracts and getting waived from training camp and all that not fun stuff. So to see her get this rest of season contract is really cool. And she will no doubt at some point become a good factor for them. But yeah, that's our show for today. We talked Aces, we talked Sun, Minnesota, Seattle, so many exciting teams in the league right now. There's so much good basketball happening, and to me, like, that's just the best part of it all. Like, I feel like the league's just getting better and better year after year in terms of the way that they play basketball. So yeah, no, it's really cool to watch. But if you enjoyed us, please follow us at Her Hoop Stats on social media. So be subscribed to wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch Coast to Coast every week. You can find me on social media at Crina MM. You can find Calvin at Wetzel 31. And we will see you next Tuesday.